Hey there, Alan Matthews here. This video is all about balancing your chords. Whenever we play a chord, all notes are not created equal. Some notes should be louder than others to bring out the color, to bring out a melody note perhaps. Some notes should be softer than another because they could get in the way of a melody note, or they could bring out a dissonance that we don't necessarily want to make into the main point. We just want it to be there in the background. So balance is a huge issue when we're playing our chords, especially when a melody is weaving through it into the interior voices, and all of a sudden we've got a big old chunky chord. It's easy to wash out that melody with the chord, and so we want to have that to where the melody still pops out. And that, my friend, is what this video is all about. Hope it helps you to play more beautifully, and I hope you enjoy it thoroughly. Let's get started. So balancing chords, this is kind of a big subject. First off, whenever we're balancing chords, that assumes that we're actually playing a chord. And so we want to make sure that we're actually playing this by closing our hands. This is first and foremost. This is going to make everything very difficult if you're not doing this. Make sure that you're closing your hand, just like we do with our slaps, clapping the hand closed. Fingers are together, not splayed. Fingertips are together when you're playing, and they just move as one. It's like a paddle, just like that. And it's moving, they're moving as one, and they're coming into the hand. Passive tips, more or less. For now, I would definitely say passive tips. Later on, if you need to load them just a little bit, then you can, just to give them a little bit of solidity. But in general, think passive tips, especially for right now while we're talking about this. So, you put your 3 fingers onto the first, second, and third string. Press in, hunch over the strings nicely so that whenever you actually close your hand, it only hits 1 string per finger. And then just close your hand. And you'll just end up with your fingers in your palm with the tip joint flat. And so that, to begin with, is just how we can play a chord like this anyway. And yes, in the midst of a piece, you may not come all the way back into your palm, but for now, practicing this, do a full follow through all the way into your palm, because otherwise you may stop short and become this little grippy thing that's very controlled and tight, and it doesn't sound good. We want a big, beautiful, lush tone that comes from just closing the hand. Now, the volume, let's just talk volume here. The volume of the chord and of each note that you play in the chord, whenever you're doing this in this way, comes from 2 things. One, how fast and sudden you are closing your hand, but more so, how much you're depressing the strings before you actually do. So put your fingers all the way onto the strings and just barely touch them, and then close your hand, and it's quieter. Press into the strings a whole lot, so you're actually going pressing right into the strings. Close your hand that way, and it's all of a sudden much louder. So the volume is contingent on how much you're actually into the string, and that is important. That's important whenever we're balancing chords, to know how the sound is actually happening here. So before we actually get into balancing one note out of the chord and everything else, and talking about which notes to do when and all this kind of stuff, we want to be able to do these 3 fingers, of course, but then we also want to do them with the thumb as well. And so you may just put on an E chord and then practice again. You want to organize around the fingers, not the thumb, so don't cater to the thumb, cater to the fingers. Get the fingers exactly where you want them to be. Down low, shooting up into the sound hole at an angle, and then let the thumb do whatever it needs to do. And you may just, on an E chord, playing AMI on the first 3 strings, and then the thumb moving between the 6th, 5th, and 4th string. Just practice that so that it's... So then you're just practicing playing chunk chords, basically. And you could do this with any chord. You could do this with whatever you wanted to do with it, do it with. But we want to make sure of a couple of things from our common mistakes video, we want to make sure that we're not bouncing, and this is very popular whenever we're playing chunk chords, that this is happening. We don't want this, oops, because that kind of thing can happen. We don't want to pop it like that. Kick your wrist out, just close your hand, and the back of your hand should not be moving in space very much at all. So just practice that. Your thumb's at a 45-degree angle to the strings, which we'll talk about more in the thumb video if you haven't watched that one. And then the hands are just closing all the way into the palm with a clap. And so this is now just playing uniform chords. And listen to the volume of each note in the chord. And whenever you're playing these, try to get them as even as possible so that no notes pop out. It's just a chord. To where if there's a melody in there, we don't know what it is unless it's the bass line. Then we don't really know what that note is. Now let's balance between the thumb and the fingers. So now we want to be able to make the thumb be loud and the fingers be quiet. And we want to make the fingers be able to be loud and the thumb quiet. So we want to be able to just differentiate between the thumb and the fingers. And so you can just do this exact same thing. I'm just going to do it on an E chord again. Practicing making the thumb loud first. We'll do the thumb loud, fingers quiet. And that means with the fingers that we're not grabbing very much of the string, but with the thumb we are. And so this is an iffy thing. It's a kind of a tricky thing. So just play with it. Make sure that you're organizing your hand around your fingers so that you got good positioning there and everything. You're just barely touching the strings to prep the fingers, but you're still touching them and prepping them. And then you're still playing the fingers, they're just very quiet, and then the thumb can come in strong. Now make sure when you're playing the thumb that it's fully following through. It should be a full follow through and come all the way by your finger over here. And these should still come all the way into the palm. It's the exact same motion. It's just that now the thumb is loud and the fingers are quiet. And how do you do this? There's no special trick for me to tell you. The thing is to just really pay attention and listen like crazy and just keep experimenting and keep trying. The major thing is that you're not depressing the finger strings very much because that's going to make it loud. So you want to just barely prep them. You just want to barely just whisper light, touch the strings on the treble side, and then close all the way into the hand, like we do. While the thumb is now actually depressing the string more and actually moving more through the string. Keep making sure that the thumb is at a 45-degree angle will help this a lot, by the way. Now the next thing that we do after you've mastered that is to flip that. So now we have the fingers depressing the strings a lot, and the thumb is not very much. Everything is the same, except that nothing's the same. Whatever that means. So now you shouldn't be able to really discern the thumb all that much, and it just sounds like the chord is just banging out on top. And so practice being able to do that, and then after you've got both of those separately, then practice flipping them, so back and forth, so that you can actually control when and where. So maybe every 4, thumb, 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 finger, 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 thumb, finger, 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 thumb, and just finger. Being able to flip them back and forth so that on command, you can either say thumbs loud or finger loud. There are great arpeggios for any kind of chord, great etudes for this. Any kind of chord arpeggio you can do this with. There are actually, I think Villalobos' third etude is actually especially for this. It's just a huge balance etude, the entire thing. But you can just do it with chords as well, and that's perfectly fine, especially when just learning and thinking about balance for now. Next, then, once we've gotten to be able to balance the thumb and the fingers, now we want to be able to pull out one actual finger and make that note louder than the other notes. Why would we want to do this? The reason is this. If we have a melody going on, then we want to be able to keep that melody up here and all the accompaniment down here. And this is one of the main things I hear in people's playing. They could have really good chops. They could be really fast players. They could be brilliant musicians, but their balance oftentimes, I hear a lot of bad balance, especially in folk players. I love Brazilian music, and in a lot of Brazilian music, people, they miss the whole balance issue because their focus is so much rhythmically, it's so much on the groove, which is great, but we need balance as well. It's also a yes and to some balance to bring out the melody so that the listener can then really understand what's going on, what's really going on. And so if we've got a melody note on the top, then what we're going to do is we're going to poke out the third finger, the A finger. We're just going to push it down a little bit more than the other ones. So now it's just further in space. You move from the big knuckle and just do this. You might just want to practice moving. And if the pinky wants to go with it, just let it. It's fine. So do that. The other thing to do is to touch the strings lightly and then just press on one of the strings more than the others. So that you're pressing the I and the M very lightly, and then the A is just pressing down and alternating between pressure and no pressure. Now your fingers are still touching. They're not splayed. They're still touching each other like this. And basically all we're doing is, right now, all we're doing is just exercising the ability to poke one finger out beyond the other fingers. Like this right here, so that finger is further out. Now whenever we actually go to play the chord, we're not going to press the string in further. I know it seems like we would, but we're not. This is not a muscle. I mean, muscles have to do everything, but we don't muscle a note out. Just like we were talking about with accents on the arpeggio variations video, then the main thing with an accented note, which is basically what we're doing, we're accenting one note within a chord, it's not so much that note's louder, so much as that there's a bigger contrast, there's a contrast between it and the other notes. So what we're going to do then is we're going to bump up that note a little bit, but mainly we're going to drop the other notes quieter. And so then what we do is we poke this finger out, just away from the guitar, just poke it out, and then whenever you put your fingers on the strings, just like when we just put our fingers on the strings earlier, you just poke one finger out, the A finger in this, and then put your fingers on the strings, and now it's basically pressing the string more already, or it's slightly on the side and it's just grabbing more string. And that way whenever we actually play it, there's a note on top, and the other notes are there. They're just not loud. It comes out. And so we're not playing this string harder. We're not plucking it harder or trying to muscle it through. We're closing our hand exactly the same way as when we were just doing uniform chords. And that's the trick to this, is that you don't actually, it's kind of a Zen thing. You don't actually try any harder to play the note louder. All you do is that you stick your finger out a little bit and play absolutely normally, and just because it's out further, it will bring the volume of that note out. And this is the crucial element of it, is that it won't sound harsh or plucked. Like if I want to, it's very easy to get a nasty tone if we're trying to snag it harder. I'm just trying to grab that note out. Don't do it that way. Just stick your finger out very lightly and then close your hand. And it's just it's super easy squeezy. You have to, we're very trained, especially here in the US, that we got to get there through hard work. It's got to be a lot of hard work and everything. But really, this isn't hard work. This is working smart instead of working hard. You just stick your finger out a little bit, close your hand, totally easy. This is, I can't tell you how easy it is. Or I should say how simple it is. If you're not used to doing this, then it's not necessarily easy, but it is simple. So then if we want to bring out the middle note, we just poke the middle finger out a little bit further, put that on the strings. I'll do it with an E chord so it's consistent with everything else. Now this note, the B, that's the note that's coming out. I'm not trying to play the B any harder. I just poke it out and then just close my hand absolutely normally. Now if the E's coming out too much, that means that you're actually just pressing it down too much whenever you're going for the string, and you should put your attention onto that string and then onto your A finger, and then just notice that you're not prepping it very hard. You're just barely whisper light touching the string as a preparation. Same thing for the I finger. So now we can do this, and you can just do this as an exercise back and forth. We can come back to, if you like, you can come back to your arpeggio practice progression that we talked about this video, and you can just go back and forth with these. So now we have the thumb, the I, the A, the M, and then the A. Of course, I'm doing it very fast, and you won't do it this fast for a little while. Whenever you're doing this, you want it to be as much of a contrast between the accented note and the unaccented notes as possible. So you want it to be quite obvious to your listener what to listen to. So if you have a whole crop of notes, 4 notes, 5 notes, 6 notes, you want to make sure that they're just listening to one of them, and that everything else is just, the atmosphere. It's the cream, it's the color, it's the backdrop, it's everything else, that their attention stays where you want their attention to stay, which is on the melody, on a beautiful singing melody. And that gives us a three-dimensional type of sound that is it's more interesting to listen to. And you would think that it would if the music's written this way, that they're going to hear it, especially in practice if you can hear it. But the fact is that's not the case. With our listeners, we really have to demonstrate everything that we want them to hear. So if we have a melody, we have to be really obvious. This is a huge game of show and tell. This is the melody right here. This is the melody. You can't assume that they'll get it if it's especially if it's clouded up with notes, in chords overlapping it, things like that. Then don't think that they're going to get it unless you demonstrate it to them. Good music doesn't play itself. You actually have to bring it and present it and say, this is my thought. This is this melody, and this is it. And yes, there are all these colorful things that are going on, and that's the beautiful world we're creating. But the melody is the thing that you want to actually listen to. If there are such things as just like textural chord things, but you want to, if there's a melody note within the chord, you want them to listen to that note. So, really quick again, we're just poking the finger out. Now there comes the question of how do you know when to do what? And that comes, put your guitar away and figure out your actual melody line in the music. You might actually use a highlighter if there's a chord. I almost always think of there being a melody note within a chord, unless there's a melody note hanging out and then there are chords underneath it. I was just in a lesson just last night playing with a great Brazilian guitar player, and Sergio Botelho, and he was working on this Ramadés Nathalie piece, and it was this samba bossa nova, and there was a melody note. I don't remember what was going on. It was something like, and then there were chords that slid down underneath it. It's very easy to go, but it's not. It's, and then the accompaniment. It's a melody note and then chords. So if you have this in your music, then it's a balance of there's a melody note and then it's part of the chord. It's not played at the exact same time as the chord, but that means actually everything else gets out of the way, especially the note after, the first note after, because then you want to create the separation and the contrast so that we know it's not that, it's whatever it was. But you want to know what your melody is, and you want to have the tools to be able to bring it out. And the way to do that is to practice in this way. Now, sometimes we do just have a chord, especially, this is on to a different point, at the end of a song, or if there's just like a field of chords, then are all notes created equal? Let's say that we're ending a song with an E chord, because that's what we've been using a lot of here. And so the question is, how am I going to, let's just do it as that. That's our ending chord. Just the low E and then the first, second, and third strings. The question is, how do I balance that? Do I just play it? And the answer is, and this takes a little bit of music theory, but if you know a little bit of music theory, then you can figure out which note this is, and that is the third of the chord. So in the key of E, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. The third is a G sharp, and this is your G sharp on the third string. And so with an exposed chord, it's typically going to be most beautiful if you bring out the third of the chord. So this, especially on an ending chord, is going to be more beautiful than, this is just a little simpler. That's a little bit unresolved with the fifth coming out, the B. E, F, G, A, B is the fifth. But the G sharp is the third, and that's the color note. That's the note that makes the chord either major or minor. It's a very colorful note. And it's the most complex relationship in a triad that just uses like a normal old cowboy chord. That note is going to be the one that is most complexly related with the one chord, the one of the chord, the name of the chord, the E. So the G sharp is going to be the one that, if you actually looked at the waveforms, is going to be the most different. It's going to be the most complex with it. And so you want to balance that. And that's a beautiful ending chord. The other notes are still there. They're just light. And so we balance that. Even if we roll it, we bring it out still. So I mean, balancing chords, if there's a question and if there's not a melody note, find the third of the chord and bring that out, and it will typically make your chords much more beautiful to do that. So that's chord balance. I hope that you can use that in your playing. I hope that you can find lots of spots in your pieces that you're already working on to use this, and I hope that you can work it into your basic practice, your technique practice, on a daily or at least every other day basis, so that you can ultimately get to where this is a very easy skill for you and you do it just absolutely naturally, so that you can keep your melody on top, keep everything else out of the way. Have fun. Adios.